Story 1: The Silent Forest. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway from the stress of work and city life. My friend Jake and I had planned a hiking trip to a remote forest known for its breathtaking views and challenging trails. The first day went smoothly. We hiked, set up camp, and enjoyed the serenity of nature. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire, telling stories and roasting marshmallows. Around midnight, we decided to turn in for the night. I woke up in the middle of the night to an eerie silence. The usual sounds of the forest, rustling leaves, chirping insects, were absent. I checked my watch. It was 3 a.m. Unable to shake the feeling of unease, I decided to step outside the tent to investigate. As I emerged, I noticed a dense fog had settled over the area, limiting visibility to just a few feet. I called out to Jake, but there was no response. Panic set in when I realized he was nowhere to be found. Grabbing a flashlight, I started searching the immediate area. My heart pounded as I ventured deeper into the fog, calling out Jake's name. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper coming from the direction of the trail we had hiked earlier. Following the sound, I came across a clearing and saw a shadowy figure standing at the edge. It looked like Jake, but something was off. His posture was rigid, and he was facing away from me. I cautiously approached, calling out his name again. As I got closer, the figure turned around slowly. It wasn't Jake. The face was gaunt, eyes sunken, and an unnatural grin spread across its face. Before I could react, the figure vanished into the fog. Terrified, I ran back to the campsite, only to find Jake standing there, confused and disoriented. He had no memory of leaving the tent. We packed up immediately and left the forest at first light. To this day, neither of us can explain what happened that night. The memory of that eerie figure still haunts me, and I haven't been hiking since. Story 2: The Old Man in the Mountains. My girlfriend Emily and I decided to take a hiking trip to the Appalachian Mountains for our anniversary. We had always enjoyed hiking together and thought it would be the perfect way to celebrate. The first few days were uneventful, filled with beautiful scenery and challenging trails. On the third day, we decided to take a less traveled path that we had heard about from a local. It was supposed to lead to a secluded waterfall. As we hiked deeper into the forest, we noticed the trail becoming more overgrown and difficult to navigate. Hours passed and we still hadn't reached the waterfall. We were about to turn back when we heard a voice calling out. We followed the sound and came across an old man sitting on a rock. He looked disheveled and tired, but his eyes were sharp and piercing. He introduced himself as Mr. Thompson and claimed he had been hiking in the area for years. Mr. Thompson offered to guide us to the waterfall, and although we were hesitant, we agreed. As we followed him, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. The forest seemed to close in around us, and an unnatural silence fell. Mr. Thompson's demeanor shifted. He became more agitated and kept glancing back at us with a strange look in his eyes. We finally reached the waterfall, but instead of feeling relieved, a sense of dread washed over us. Mr. Thompson turned to us with a sinister smile and said, "This is where it ends." Before we could react, he lunged at Emily, knocking her to the ground. I grabbed a rock and struck him, giving us enough time to escape. We ran back to the trail and didn't stop until we reached the main path. When we reported the incident to the authorities, they informed us that no one named Mr. Thompson had been seen in the area for years. They mentioned an old man matching his description who had gone missing decades ago. The experience left us shaken, and we vowed never to take an unmarked trail again. Story 3: The Disappearing Campers. A group of friends and I decided to go on a hiking and camping trip in the Rockies. It was supposed to be an adventurous escape from our daily lives. We set out early in the morning, eager to reach our campsite before nightfall. The hike was challenging but rewarding, with stunning views and fresh mountain air. We reached our campsite in the late afternoon, set up our tents, and started a fire. As night fell, we sat around the campfire, sharing stories and laughing. Around midnight, one of our friends, Sarah, mentioned hearing footsteps in the woods. We dismissed it as her imagination and continued with our evening. However, as the night went on, the footsteps became more frequent and louder. We decided to investigate but found nothing. The next morning, we noticed that two of our friends, Mark and Lisa, were missing. Their tents were empty and their belongings were left behind. Panic set in as we searched the area, calling out their names. Hours passed with no sign of them. We decided to head back to the trailhead to get help. On our way back, we found Mark and Lisa's backpacks and shoes neatly placed on a rock. There were no signs of a struggle, and the area was eerily quiet. When we finally reached the trailhead, we reported the incident to the rangers. They organized a search party, but despite their efforts, Mark and Lisa were never found. The experience left us all traumatized, and we couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent had taken our friends. To this day, their disappearance remains a mystery, and the memory of that haunting hike still lingers. Story 4: The Watcher in the Shadows. I always loved hiking alone. The solitude and connection with nature provided a much-needed escape from my hectic life. One summer, I decided to hike a remote trail in the Pacific Northwest. The trail was known for its dense forests and beautiful vistas. I set out early in the morning, enjoying the peace and quiet of the wilderness. As I hiked deeper into the forest, I noticed a strange feeling of being watched. I shrugged it off as paranoia and continued on my path. A few hours in, I stopped for a break and sat down on a fallen log. That's when I saw a shadowy figure standing just beyond the tree line. It was tall and human-like, but lacked any distinct features. I blinked, and it was gone. Feeling unnerved, I continued my hike, but the sense of being watched only grew stronger. I quickened my pace, constantly glancing over my shoulder. The forest seemed darker, and the silence was deafening. As I rounded a bend, I saw the figure again, closer this time. My heart raced as I realized it was following me. I decided to head back to the trailhead, but the figure stayed with me, always just out of reach. As night fell, I reached a small clearing and set up camp, too exhausted to continue. I built a fire and tried to stay calm, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I barely slept, constantly waking up to the sound of rustling leaves and twigs snapping. At dawn, I packed up and made my way back to the trailhead. The figure was gone, but the sense of unease remained. When I reached my car, I felt a wave of relief. I reported the incident to the park rangers, but they found no evidence of anyone else being on the trail. The experience left me shaken, and I haven't hiked alone since. The memory of that shadowy figure in the forest still haunts me, a reminder that sometimes the wilderness holds more than just natural beauty. Story: The Basement Terror. Megan had always been a responsible and diligent babysitter, trusted by many families in her neighborhood. When the Johnsons asked her to watch their kids one Saturday night, she gladly accepted. The Johnsons lived in a large old house with a notoriously creepy basement that the kids were always warned to stay away from. The night started off uneventfully. After playing games and watching a movie, Megan put the kids, Jake and Emma, to bed. She settled down in the living room to finish some homework, the quiet of the house only interrupted by the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Around midnight, Megan heard a strange noise coming from the basement. It sounded like something scraping against the walls. Remembering the Johnsons' warnings, she was hesitant to investigate but decided to check just to be sure everything was all right. She grabbed a flashlight and carefully opened the basement door. The basement stairs creaked under her weight as she descended. The air grew colder and a musty smell filled her nostrils. The scraping noise grew louder, echoing through the dark space. She shone her flashlight around, revealing old furniture and boxes covered in dust. Then she saw a large, old wardrobe standing in the corner, its doors slightly ajar. The scraping noise was coming from inside. Megan's heart pounded as she approached the wardrobe. She hesitated, then reached out and pulled the doors open. Inside was a small, dusty mirror and an old, tattered coat. But there was no sign of anything that could have made the noise. Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut, plunging her into darkness. She screamed and dropped the flashlight, the beam flickering as it hit the floor. Panicked, she scrambled to pick it up. As she did, she heard a low, growling noise coming from the shadows. Megan shone the flashlight around the room but saw nothing. The growling grew louder, more menacing. She backed up against the wall, her breath coming in short gasps. She could feel a cold presence closing in on her. The flashlight flickered and went out, leaving her in complete darkness. She heard footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. Terrified, she pressed herself against the wall, trying to stay silent. The footsteps stopped right in front of her. She could feel the icy breath of whatever was there, but she couldn't see it. Then she heard a whisper, "Leave now or suffer." Megan bolted for the stairs, stumbling in the dark. She reached the top and threw the door open, slamming it shut behind her. She locked it and leaned against it, trying to calm her racing heart. She could still hear the growling and scraping from the other side. Determined to keep the kids safe, she checked on Jake and Emma. They were sound asleep, oblivious to the terror below. Megan decided to stay in their room until the Johnsons returned. She sat in the corner, clutching the flashlight, her eyes never leaving the door. When the Johnsons came home, they found Megan pale and shaking, unable to explain what had happened. She insisted on leaving immediately and refused to ever babysit there again. The Johnsons were puzzled but respected her wishes. Years later, Megan learned that the house had a dark history. The previous owners had a son who had gone missing, and his body was never found. Some said his spirit haunted the basement, seeking revenge on anyone who dared to enter. Megan never forgot the terror she felt that night, and the basement remained a place of nightmares in her memory.